Hi, I'm Ashton, and I hate the way my hair looks right now, but it's fine. Dan Howell came out as queer, and I want to talk about it. This isn't something that I would usually talk about, but I do talk about a lot of like LGBTQIA+ related things. This is also like an internet thing, and internet culture is something that interests me a lot, and I thought Dan's video was absolutely fucking incredible. And I wanted to talk about it because, as I just said, it was great. It was really good. I don't know how many of you are really going to care about this, but it's something that I really wanted to talk about for a lot of reasons that I will get into, but I wanted to kind of analyze why I think it was so good and what parts of it made it that good. Also, if I wear this choker really high up, it looks like I have a really weird rainbow beard. I just wanted to share that. So as I'm recording this, the video came out 6 hours ago. I will probably post this when it's been out for about like 24 hours. I don't know. We'll see how fast I can edit. But anyways, I know that for my regular audience, this may not be something that you want to watch. I get it. I just kind of wanted to analyze why I thought this was a really effective video and why I liked it a lot more than some other coming out videos that I have seen. And I also want to say before I get started, if you haven't seen Dan's video, I know it's long, I get it, but it is worth it, and it just gets better the further you get into it, and I would definitely recommend watching that before you watch this, just because this video is going to make a heck of a lot more sense if you actually have the full context. So I would recommend doing that first. Obviously, I will link it in the description. I promise I will remember to do that. I know a lot of times I forget. If I forgot this time, literally yell at me in the comments. First things first, I wanted to explain how I'm going to structure my video because his video was very well structured and we'll get into that later. But one, I want to start with like a little intro thing, obviously, and then I'm going to actually go through chapter by chapter the things that I thought were extremely effective and really impactful from Dan's video itself. So this is the first video you've seen of mine, which I think is probably pretty unlikely, but you never know. Hi, I'm queer. I'm a non-binary trans man, and I am also, well, my sexuality is complex, but I'm demisexual and I'm also pansexual, although I most commonly call myself gay because I've been dating a man for a very long time, and I tend to lean towards men, and gay is just a more comfortable label for me than pansexual at the moment, but that's a whole different topic. So anyways, I'm queer. That's how I'm going to introduce myself in this context. I also, before I get started, wanted to kind of mention that I have been watching Dan and Phil for a very, very long time. I have been watching them for a long time. I do own the book. I got it for Christmas like 5 years ago or something. I've probably been watching them since I was 12 or 13. I'm now 18. I wouldn't say I love Dan and Phil, but like, I've watched their content for a long time and I generally enjoy their content. That's my relationship with them as an audience member. Cool. All of that said, I've never really been in the fandom per se, and I don't really like associating with that particular fandom, not because I see them as cringy or young or whatever, but because of the fetishization that often went on or possibly still goes on. I'm not sure how active the fandom is now, but of course, you know, I was on Tumblr when I was in middle school, and I definitely saw my fair share of things that I did not want to see related to Dan and Phil, and it was unavoidable in that era of Tumblr, honestly. There were a lot of cishet girls that fetishized Dan and Phil, thinking about them having a relationship. I wasn't a part of that. It didn't appeal to me, and it appeals to me even less now. So anyways, again, the reason that I wanted to make this video is because I really fucking loved Dan's 45-minute coming out video, and I'm usually not really the biggest fan of coming out videos. A lot of the times they're either entirely too comedic or entirely too like heavy and emotional, and a lot of the times they follow a very awkwardly similar formula. Hi guys. This is a video that has taken me a long time to create and to talk about. But I think I'm finally ready to tell you that I'm heterosexual. My brother, though, is also heterosexual, but I have a cousin that's gay. And it's been really difficult for me, but I wanted to come out as an ally. Obviously, I'm over-exaggerating. That is not directed at anyone in particular, but what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of common themes throughout a lot of YouTubers coming out videos, and there is definitely a, I wouldn't say a trend, but a type of video where a YouTuber will kind of clickbait their sexuality, like, oh, the truth about my sexuality, and then they're just like, I'm straight, I'm an ally though, it's cool. Which isn't something I appreciate, because using queerness as a clickbait thing is not exactly the best idea. Anyways, Dan's video was unique compared to that, and a video that long and in that style is obviously going to be pretty in-depth, and I wanted to discuss why it was so impactful and some of the things that made it impactful for me personally. Before I get into chapter 1 and all of the chapters after that, I wanted to highlight a few general things that kind of weren't like specifically things he said, but just things that made the video good in general. One, the variation of tone. As I said before, a lot of coming out videos on YouTube are either entirely too emotional and like really, really, really heavy, or incredibly lighthearted and comedic and not really delving into any issues surrounding discrimination or homophobia or anything. Dan's video was both heartbreakingly deep and serious and really, really silly. Starting out a video with,
spoiler alert, I'm not straight,
is just mwah. It felt like he injected his personality and his humor into a very, very heartfelt video, and I loved that. I am also a huge fan of like video essay style videos. It is like 90% of what I watch probably, so the fact that this was organized into chapters, so good. Beautiful. Thank you, Dan. It was also just an incredibly well done video, like not just a video essay, but a well done video essay. Like he had color theming. I don't know how many other people noticed this, but like each chapter had a different color for like what it was titled as, and then his lighting was also that color, and all of the little drawings that he had shitty watercolor do were also like done with line work in that color. I don't know if anybody else appreciated that as much as I did, but holy shit, I appreciated that so much. Just the cohesion and the planning that clearly went into this video. The lighting, the attention to detail, and the structure of the video itself reminded me a lot of video essays done by leftist YouTubers, which does make me wonder, like, Dan, what do you watch? Okay, 2 more things before I delve into each chapter individually. 1, the fact that he made sex and sexuality a valid and important discussion is something that I think is really valuable. I don't know what his analytics look like, but typically the audience age that one would associate with Dan and Phil is like teens, preteens, right? So the fact that he's talking about something this significant and this important, I think is really, really valuable and a good thing for him to discuss. Obviously, I have nothing against silly comedic videos or anything, but I think bringing up topics of discussion like this is something really, really cool that more people that create things for younger audiences should do. He also defined and discussed heteronormativity, and I'm putting this in this section because it was before he introduced his whole chapter structure, but oh boy, heteronormativity is a big discussion that I could have, and anyone really that is in any way educated about queer theory could have, but it's a huge issue, it's a huge topic, and I'm really glad that he even just brought it up. But the fact that he defined it and discussed how it's made him question himself and made him repress his own feelings is something that I feel is really important, and it's something that I'm glad he touched on. You know, you don't expect to watch a YouTuber coming out video and hear them talking about heteronormativity. You know, that's something that you expect on like the queer side of YouTube, like on my channel, right? But you're not going to expect it from really big names such as Daniel Howell. So I thought that was really cool. Again, this goes back to the fact that he's introducing these complex and really, really important topics to a younger audience, and to an audience that may not have been exposed to that before. And I think that's rad. Chapters 1 and 2, I don't really have a lot to talk about because, you know, he mainly focused on his personal story about being queer. But there are a few things that I can relate to, and a few things that I believe are quite unique compared to a lot of other coming out videos that I did want to touch on. When Dan talks about the first time him hearing the word gay being negative and being associated with violence towards him, I, like, had a fucking brainwave connection with those, like, 30 seconds, okay? He may be 9 years older than me, but the culture of using gay as, like, a catch-all negative insult honestly hasn't changed that much, at least not between the time that he went to grade school and I did. Gay is still used widely, at least where I live, which, to be fair, is in fucking North Carolina, but it's still used a lot of the times as a slur. I don't have as good of a memory as he does about it, but I do know that the first time I heard the word gay, it was probably an insult thrown at me. And I have a bit of a different experience because even though I am a gay man, I grew up a very masculine girl. And while I was probably insultingly called a lesbian long before people also started to call me gay, it's still an experience that I had and still an experience that I really relate to a lot. And that sucks, but it's true. And also in chapter 1 came the realization that, in his own words,
You're telling me this whole time I actually have been the bad thing that people keep calling me? Shit.
God, do I feel that. So a little bit of a personal history, okay? So in 6th grade, I thought I was a cis woman and a lesbian, but at that point I had not thought about my gender at all in a complex way, so, you know, still, you know, the default girl. 9th grade, I was like, okay, I'm a non-binary guy, but very heavily guy, and I want to transition, and also I really, really like guys, and I don't know why I ever thought I was a lesbian, probably because I was forced into being that label of queer, because I knew I was queer, I just didn't know how to express it, and lesbian was the easiest thing for me, and it didn't end up working. Hi, I'm gay. So yeah, that was another thing in chapter 1 that personally resonated with me a lot, and I'm glad that he expressed that because I feel like it's definitely something that others would also relate to, even if they don't have the exact same experiences as him, or even vaguely similar ones to me. So, chapter 2, feelings. First off, this.
I swear to God, emo is one of the best things that happened to pop culture in the last 20 years.
Unironically loving emo culture? Hell yeah. Something that I've talked about a little bit before, like very a little bit, I think in a book review, was that I really hate feeling shame for past phases that you've had. Listen, I really love joking about how I've been in my emo phase since like 6th grade and it's been like 10 years and I'm still in my emo phase, but I don't think there is anything shameful about having phases. Phases build up who you are, and it's important to recognize that that's a part of who you were at one point, and you probably still carry on some of those traits from those days, and even if you don't, living in those specific subcultures shaped who you are, and I feel like your past is something that is important to recognize and celebrate and not be ashamed of. So Dan saying the emo culture is great? Hell yeah. Full support, 10 out of 10. That's not related to anything gay, but like I still wanted to appreciate it because I'm me. Something else that I also really appreciated in the 2nd chapter was that he corrected his past self. This is where I feel like his story divulges a lot from many other coming out stories that I've seen, because when he was younger he thought that he was bi. So Dan talked about how he identified as bi because he saw it as like, well, I'm not straight, but like I still get that little bit of being straight while still like I like boys. It was a very complex thing. Again, you should go watch the video. But then he like kind of corrects who he was in his past by saying this.
To be clear, regardless of whatever the 2006 teenagers' thoughts and feelings were, being bi is valid and should not be excused away or erased by anyone. Thank you.
And I really fucking appreciated that. I really respected that. I thought that it was good, and I'm glad that it took the responsibility to correct a misconception that some of his viewers now might have, as well as showing that he has definitely grown from his past. I thought that was really cool. And finally, at the end of the feelings chapter, Dan brought up internalized depression, and I wanted to cry.
I couldn't be gay. I was afraid of it. Literally homophobic of myself. I am talking Pavlov, sunken place, North Korea level mind alteration that made me terrified of and repulsed by this part of me. This is called internalized depression. It's a real thing, and it's some real shit.
Internalized depression is a big deal and a complex issue, and again, it's something that I'm glad Dan is introducing to his likely young audience. Internalized depression is seen oftentimes as a joke. It was like a huge meme for one point, and that genuinely hurts me as someone that has had a lot of experiences with internalized depression, similar to Dan in many ways, but it's something that I'm really, really glad he brought up and genuinely had a discussion about. It's a lot of the times brushed off as a joke, but internalized depression is like a genuine real thing, even in psychology and many different fields of philosophy you'll hear it talked about. It was just something that I'm really glad that he brought up in a genuine way. And it can be really, really difficult to be honest about those types of things, especially because it became a meme for a while, and I'm really, really fucking proud of him. Anyways, on a similar topic, chapter 3. internalized depression. The first thing that I picked up from this section that I wanted to talk about is Dan talked about attempting suicide. He didn't explicitly talk about how, but he talked about attempting, and that is a fucking brave thing to talk about. It's something that not even I've talked about a lot, despite having also been in a similar situation. Maybe I will someday, but it's not something that I'm very comfortable with even years after it happened. And yeah, it's not something that only Dan has talked about, but it's still a really, really powerful story, especially because for him, his suicide attempt was linked to all of that internalized depression and all of that environmental abuse that he was receiving. And I thought that it was just a really powerful message, especially because of the way that he left that discussion about suicide with this.
I want anyone that's ever felt like this to realize you are never trapped. There is always hope.
Putting a positive spin on that awful situation and showing that growth that he's experienced because of it was something that was really powerful for me. Another thing that came out of this chapter is that Dan talked about that he and Phil have had or do have, it's not clear, a romantic relationship. And I thought that was really fucking cool that he came out about that. Especially because he then qualified it with,
I'm somebody that wants to keep the details of my personal life private. So is Phil. I know lots of people these days, thanks to social media, want to share and monetize every aspect of their life, and then as soon as something changes, suddenly it's this huge drama because everybody got invested in the story of your life like it's a soap opera. I don't want that.
Even though he's out now, even though he's out as queer, he still doesn't want people prying into that part of his life, and I respect that so much. Like, you have no idea. Jen and Phil are obviously, at the very least, incredibly close friends, and neither of them want to disclose what the full nature of their relationship is, and that's okay. And they have that right to keep that privacy, and I really, really friggin' hope all of their fans and followers respect that. And I'm really proud of him for setting that boundary and saying that even though he's an internet person and is online, that doesn't make anybody that follows him entitled to knowing about his personal relationships. That's something that I really respect. I think it's incredibly important and incredibly powerful that he chose to say something that he knew would probably get some backlash. There are still going to be people that bother him about himself and Phil, but the fact that he feels safe enough to come out and that he feels powerful and secure enough to say, I'm not going to give you intimate details, I think that's really, really incredible. He also talked a lot about respecting people's boundaries, and that even if you suspect that someone may be queer, you shouldn't fucking out them, and you shouldn't try to push that narrative of them being queer, because you don't know what they're going through. Insert clip here, Ashton.
We don't know this person's life story, what they've been through, if they haven't told people, if they'll lose their job, if they're in danger. There are so many reasons someone might not be open about it. We can preach the message that being out is good, but aggressively speculating or trying to out someone is really bad. They might not be gay, in which case we're just harassing someone and probably stereotyping, and if they are, there's gonna be a reason why they haven't talked about it.
And I thought that was also a really powerful message to send, and one that should be, again, talked about more often, and one that you don't see in a lot of coming out videos. Going back to fandom culture, I saw so many posts on Tumblr outlining why fan is real, and it always bothered me a lot because fetishization of gay men and prying into people's personal lives when they clearly don't want to talk about that. Even back in 2015, I'd see a post like that on Tumblr and I'd be like, that seems like I don't like that. I am also incredibly glad that he defended himself preemptively.
So I don't want to see any responses to me finally talking about this, no one is surprised.
Dan, we've been new.
Wow, you huge galaxy brain genius. What's it like walking around with all those brain cells in there, working overtime? What, you got 3 in there? Don't lose your balance, mastermind.
The fact that he knew that people would leave comments saying oh, we've known, or huh, that's really obvious, Dan. The fact that he knew that would happen and that he talked about it in the video and was like, hey, don't fucking do this. He was determined to kind of nip that in the bud and say like, I don't appreciate this, and here's why you shouldn't do that. I thought that was really powerful. Again, it's not something that a lot of creators have addressed when they come out, and I thought that it was really important and very insightful of him that he did. I also thought a really interesting thing that he talked about was the dynamic of importance of representation as opposed to the responsibility of public figures as opposed to the desire to keep things private, and as well as internalized homophobia or internalized transphobia kind of holding you back from coming out. And it's a huge big discussion, and it's something that I could make like a 5-hour video on, but he had a few statements on that topic that I thought were really, really powerful and really good. Another really important thing, and possibly like the thing that I thought was the most unique about this video, was the fact that he recognized his own privilege, like explicitly.
But we get dealt cards from the start too. If you look at my life, I was born into this world as an able-bodied, white, cis man in Britain, which immediately gives me so much privilege in this current world, and I am fully aware of how much harder making it to today could have been for me.
I have never seen like a typical YouTuber coming out video where that person came out but also recognized that maybe they're white or that they're upper class or that they're cisgender. And Dan recognized those things like willingly and openly and talked about how those things have informed his experience and how others often struggle more than he did because of those intersecting axes of oppression. Again, I thought that was really insightful, and I'm really fucking glad that he talked about that. Because it's not something that I've seen talked about among common circles. Like, obviously I've seen it talked about on queer corners of YouTube, on leftist corners of YouTube, and obviously social media in general, but it's not something that I've seen in the mainstream. And I would consider Dan a very mainstream creator, which is again why I'm really glad that he's talking about things like that. Also, small last thing about that chapter, he expressed a sentiment of how being silent is being complicit with the oppressors, and that's a really important thing to recognize, not only in the area of queerness, but in all areas of social justice, and I'm really proud of him for, you know, saying to such a large audience an opinion that is generally seen as, like, relatively radical. I don't think it should be, but it tends to be in today's political climate, so... Okay, before I talk myself into like an everlasting spiral, chapter 4, labels. The first thing that I thought was interesting here was that he touched on the limits of language, which of course is something that is like a huge discussion within philosophy, and this video is gonna make me sound like a philosophy nerd. Not that that's not the case, but...
People want you to give them a word because that's how humans communicate, with words that have meanings, which is why our disgusting species is impatient, stupid, and obsessed with labels.
The fact that Dan is self-aware enough to say that I'm not comfortable with any of these labels in particular, and they feel restrictive to me, but they're still important to other people, is something that I find really valuable and not something that I have seen in a lot of mainstream coming out videos. Also, a couple of the things that he touched upon could very easily be linked to the philosophical concept of linguistic determinism, which is one of, like, my favorite philosophy concepts, so I was ready to discuss this, but, like, he moved on, so I'm just gonna... Dan also expressed his comfort and his kind of apatheticness about his own gender, which is something that as a trans person I can't personally relate to, but I really appreciated his inclusion of trans people in this discussion, because he did qualify it with, even though I feel this way, other people might not. Again, this is something that I found unique about the video, because he explicitly included trans people in the queer community, whereas a lot of the times, again, in mainstream coming out videos, you see a creator saying, I'm bisexual or I'm gay, and talking about being in the LGBTQ+ community, but not talking at all about trans people. So I'm glad that not only here, but in multiple instances throughout the video, Dan mentioned trans people and defended trans people. Another thing that I thought was really cool was that Dan expressed that he is comfortable with and happy to embrace the label of queer.
This is why I personally love the word queer. I understand that some people don't, as it is a slur, but as someone that's been the target of it several times throughout my life, I'm up for some reclamation. It's like recycling. The definition makes sense because until society is equal with all sexual and gender identities, it is literally strange from a conventional viewpoint. Plus, it's better than a super long acronym, it's inclusive of everyone, and therefore great for formless blobs.
I'm also a little bit pissed because last night, I guess for you guys 2 nights ago, the night before this video came out, I started writing a video essay on reclaiming queer, and Dan pretty much stole all my points from me and put them into this 10-second clip. I'm not actually mad. I'm still gonna write that video essay, and it's gonna be good. But I think it was a really well-worded way of explaining why queer is often used as an umbrella term, as well as why he uses it for himself. I think it's really powerful to reclaim slurs, and even though there are obviously some for each of us that we're not comfortable reclaiming, queer is one that a lot of people have been reclaiming recently and one that I personally love. And it's one that I'm really happy that Dan is cool with using because it is a word that I think is very powerful, which I will talk about later in my video essay. On to my next point, I thought that it was incredibly powerful that Dan admitted the word gay scares me.
But to come full circle, I know that even today, deep in my heart, the word gay scares me, because that's how I've been conditioned my whole life. So you know what? Fuck the literal definition and the scientific definition and what everyone thinks. I finally have to just confront and accept this. I'm gay.
Because it is scary, and even though I grew up 9 years later than Dan did, it's still a word that I had to work through, and I probably didn't experience as much bullying as he did, although I did experience my fair share. And before I came out, and before I came out to myself, I guess, I had to work through a lot of internalized hatred and a lot of me telling myself that I shouldn't identify as gay because gay equals bad, which is something that Dan explored in depth in his video, which again, if you're at this point in the video and you haven't watched it, like, even though through the whole video he's been talking about internalized homophobia and toxic masculinity and a bunch of really, really complex social topics, admitting to yourself and to the whole ass internet that gay is a word that scares you and a word that you are scared to identify as because you've associated it with negativity your whole life, that's really, really powerful. And it's something that even I would struggle to admit, even though it is something that I know that I experience. So I think here, the thing that was really, really powerful for me was that Dan not only talked about his past experiences with abuse from his peers and with homophobia from society as a whole, he talked about his own continuing feelings about homophobia and about the word gay and about the word queer. And that was just really, really powerful for me. The fact that he is willing to recognize and talk about and know that internalized homophobia continues to affect him, that's something that once you can embrace it for yourself, it is so much easier to get over that internalized homophobia. And again, I'm just incredibly proud of him, and I feel like that's a really important thing to recognize for yourself, and it's a really, really powerful thing to open up about, especially to millions of people that you mostly don't know. So as I kind of explained, there was a lot in this particular chapter that I couldn't relate to as a trans person and as somebody that really loves labels, and I got like 20 just for my gender. But somebody that's not a lot like that is my boyfriend, Jack. So hello, Jack.
Hello.
Go for it.
I really related heavily to chapter 4 of this video, in which Dan talks about his own gender and sexuality, mainly because one of his points is his dislike for labels in general. I also do not like labels. I've never found one that I can really relate to that well, never one that doesn't really feel right for me. I'll say that I'm bisexual or pansexual just like when people ask. But in reality, like, those labels don't really mean anything for me. They're just sort of something that happens to coincide with how I feel. But in terms of gender, Dan mentions that if anything, he feels like a formless blob, which me too. But I do relate to that, just because I really don't care about my gender. Maybe it isn't that I don't care about it, I just feel apathetic towards it, and I've never really had to think about it.
Because you've never had any experiences of, like, dysphoria or euphoria, right? So it's not something that, like, impacts you on a day-to-day.
Yeah. Like, Dan mentions that, like, it wouldn't matter to him. He doesn't think if anyone, like, whether anyone used like he, they, or even she with him. And honestly, I feel that way too, just because that's never something that I've been conscious about. But Dan also did a really good job of pointing out that just because he and other cisgender people like myself have never really had to think about stuff like that, that doesn't make the people who have thought about stuff like that any less valid. And obviously, just because I am completely apathetic towards my gender does not disqualify people who do like really have an emotional and mental investment in their gender.
Yeah.
He eventually comes to the conclusion that he really likes the word queer.
Yeah.
I don't think I like the word queer for myself.
That's okay.
Personally. Partly because, I mean, yeah, it is still a slur, but I mean, people can use it if they want. But also just, I don't know, it doesn't feel right for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you tied me down and told me, you know, you have to pick, you know, you have to give a label for your sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would say pansexual. That's something that pansexual and bisexual are things that I feel fine calling myself either of those, and if they're clarifying for other people, then that's good. But mainly, I don't like labels for myself. I am just
You.
Yeah. And as for gender, I don't give a shit. Formless blob.
But you would consider yourself a cisgender man.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
I would definitely say I am a cisgender. I am not gender queer in any way. I hope this segment is helpful.
It is. Thank you.
Okay.
I
No
love
problem.
you.
I love you too.
Okay, chapter 5, fear. First things first, Dan talked about how he came out to his family in an email, which I can relate to, but I actually one-upped Dan on this one because I came out to my family in a handwritten letter, like that I put a postage stamp on, wrote my home address, and mailed to my family from like 200 miles away. So, a lot of people, and I feel like these people are mainly not queer, but I feel like a lot of people do think that nowadays it's easy to come out or it's easy to tell people, and Dan talking about how it's still not, and it still is a scary process. Even if you logically know that these people aren't going to be homophobic, it's still terrifying. And I'm glad that he mentioned that, and I'm glad that he talked about how fucking scared he is, because me too, okay? I'm scared like every day of my life, and that's not something I talk about a lot, but like I have a lot of fear, and that's something that I'm learning to live with and learning to combat. But it was really powerful, again, for him to admit that he has these fears still and admit that there are still things that he's working through, because I think all of us always have things that we're working through. One thing that made me really, really sad, though, was that Dan expressed his fear, again, I guess, fitting for the chapter, of not being accepted into the queer community.
And in my mind, if these people don't accept me because I'm not being definitive enough or I took too long, then I almost feel like I'll be alone all over again.
And I get that fear. Like, the queer community is, as he explained, expansive, and there's a lot of discourse all the time. But I, for one, I accept you into my queer community, okay? There's a new queer community, and it's just me and Dan Howell. Again, I can't speak for the whole queer community, but I, for one, am 1,000,000% in support of Dan Howell, and I know that these are not just fears that he has, and again, it's something that I'm glad he talked about, because when more commonplace mainstream YouTubers make coming out videos, I almost never see them being like, I'm scared I won't be accepted in this community, because a lot of them have like this, I don't want to say entitlement, but have this baseline level of confidence that they know they're going to be accepted, because everyone loves a new gay in town. But the fact that Dan recognizes that the community is complex and multi-layered, I think just goes to show how much thought he's put into this. And finally, to round it all out, the way that he ended the video.
Queer people exist. Choosing not to accept them is not an option.
That was really powerful for me. Not only because it's a sentiment that I share 1,000,000%, but that it shows that he is not fucking backing down, and I love that. He's not going to sit there and apologize to homophobes. He's saying straight out that he supports queer people, and he's not going to listen to TERFs, you know? At the end of the day, I think it's really, really obvious that a lot of thought went into this video, and that he's been thinking about it for a really, really long time, and that he still has conflicting emotions about that. And admitting that, and admitting that he has that weakness, is incredibly powerful. For me, this was 1,000,000,000,000 times more impactful than any other mainstream coming out video I've ever seen. And trust me, I've seen a lot of them. I guess just to finally end this video after however the heck long it's been, I appreciate Dan. And this is just, I guess, a few of the reasons that I feel like that video was incredibly impactful and incredibly meaningful, and a really good message for him to put out there. I could go on about more things about this forever. If you want to talk in the comments about it, I am more than happy to do so. But yeah, those are all my thoughts right now. Actually not, there's more I could talk about. Again, those are not all of the thoughts that I have, but this video is getting really long and I actually need to go to bed, and also my brother's screaming about the Toronto Raptors, so like, I'm sorry. I just wanted to express some of the reasons why this video was like personally impactful to me, and why I feel like it is a really good message, especially compared to a lot of the mainstream coming out videos, considering Dan's fan base, and considering the fact that he pushed through so much fetishization of his relationship, and that he's still able to talk about this in such an open and vulnerable way. I just have so much respect for that. I hope that you understand where I'm coming from, and that you also appreciate Dan. And if you haven't watched the video already, I've already watched it twice, so it's fine. I did it for you. Okay, goodbye. Thank you for just letting me go off about this. I love you all. Also, I'm just very curious, if anyone's still watching at this point, make a comment about my conch ring, because I usually have a stud in it, and I changed it to a ring today, and I don't know how I feel about it. I think I like it, but I'm not sure yet. Anyways, goodbye, and I will talk to you later, maybe.